The mansion was heavy with silence. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes dull from too many sleepless nights. 8 years of marriage, and still no child. 8 years of prayers, fasting, and tears that never filled the house with the cry of a baby. The door burst open, and Richard stormed in, his short collar loose, his face dark with rage. He threw his keys on the dresser. 8 years, Clara! 8 years and not even one child to call mine. What kind of wife are you? Clara's voice broke. Richard, please, let us try again. Another doctor, another treatment. Do not throw me away. Before he could reply, Richard's mother, Mrs. Okoye, stepped into the room, her wrapper swishing as she folded her arms. Her eyes burned with scorn. Richard, why are you still listening to her? This woman has turned your name into a mockery. 8 years and no child? Every time I go to the market, people laugh behind me. They say the Okoyes have no future, no heir. Mama, please, Clara whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. I am not barren. I have prayed. I have tried. Enough, Mrs. Okoye snapped. A woman who cannot give her husband children has no place here. You eat his food, wear his clothes, yet you give him nothing in return. Leave before you destroy him completely. Richard's voice was cold as stone. My mother is right. Clara, I have worked too hard to let my name die in silence. Who will inherit all I've built? Who will carry my legacy? Tomorrow I will meet my lawyer. By morning I want you out of this house. Clara's knees gave way. She clutched his trousers, sobbing. Richard, please, after everything I gave you, after all I sacrificed, you cannot throw me away like trash. He yanked his leg free with disgust. Enough. You are finished here. This marriage ends tonight. The words sliced through Clara's chest. 8 years of love and sacrifice crumbled in an instant. Clara remained on the cold marble floor long after Richard's footsteps faded, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. The words still echoed, by morning, you must be gone. She had no strength left to cry. Her heart felt like a cracked pot, broken in so many places that no prayer could hold it together anymore. She wanted to believe this was a nightmare and that she would wake up to the man she once loved, but the harsh reality was staring her in the face. When the dawn finally crept in, Richard's mother appeared at Clara's door with 2 housemaids. Get up, she backed, her tone sharp as a whip. This is no longer your home. Pack your rags and leave before the neighbors hear your cries and laugh at my son. She watched with folded arms as the maids stuffed her belongings into an old faded bag. Its seams stretched as if it could burst at any moment. To Mrs. Okoye, Clara was not a wife of 8 years, but an intruder who had overstayed her welcome. Clara dragged herself to her feet, her eyes swollen from the night of tears. Mama, please, do not do this. I have served this family with all my heart. I cooked, I cleaned, I prayed. I gave Richard everything, even my savings, my jewelry, my sweat, to build the business that now carries this family's name. Do not throw me away like this. Her voice cracked with desperation, but Mrs. Okoye's face hardened. And yet, after all that, you gave us nothing. What use is money without children? What use is sacrifice without an heir? Do not waste my time with your excuses. Leave now before I have the gate man throw you out like the trash you are. Richard stepped closer, his expression twisted with coldness. Clara, stop talking as if I owe you anything. Whatever money you gave me was a gift. I built my empire with my own hands. Do not stand here and act like you are the reason I am successful. His words cut deeper than a knife. Clara remembered nights when she had gone without food so he could have transport fare, days she had sold her gold earrings to help him pay off debts, and the afternoon she withdrew every naira from her account to fund the opening of his first shop. Yet now, in front of her mother, he erased her role as if she had never existed. Mrs. Okoye's lips curled into a sneer. Listen to my son, woman. He is a man of vision, and you are a burden he has carried for too long. If he had married someone else, by now we would be celebrating grandchildren running around this compound. Instead, We are mocked. People whisper that the Oquays are cursed. Enough. Leave before you finish his destiny. She signaled to the housemaids, who stepped forward with cold efficiency, pulling Clara's few belongings into a worn suitcase. It seemed stretched as if it could burst at any moment. Clara's knees gave way again, but she forced herself to stand, her dignity clinging to her like a fragile thread. The house she had scrubbed clean with her own hands, the kitchen where she had cooked countless meals, the bedroom where she had dreamed of cradling a child, all of it had turned into a cage that now spat her out like an unworthy stranger. Her fingers brushed the rough fabric of the faded bag, its seams straining from being hastily stuffed with her life's remains. The housemaids carried the bag to the gate, their faces blank with indifference. Clara followed behind slowly, her bare feet dragging across the polished tiles. At the massive iron gate, Richard's driver dropped the bag roughly by the roadside. "Madame, this is where it ends," he muttered, avoiding her eyes. Clara turned back one last time, hoping for a glance of mercy from Richard, but he stood at the balcony beside his mother, their eyes hard and unmoved. With a sharp clang, the gate shut, cutting her off completely. Whispers rose from the neighbors who had gathered across the street. Some shook their heads in pity, but others smirked with cruel delight. 8 years and no child, one woman whispered. All her beauty wasted, another added. At least Richard is free now. He will marry someone who can give him an heir. Clara lowered her head, her vision blurred with tears. Every whisper was a knife twisting into her soul. She gripped the torn handle of the old bag, her body trembling as the truth settled in. She had nowhere to go, no child to comfort her, and no husband to shield her. Clara lifted her bag with trembling hands and began to walk aimlessly down the dusty road. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of her shattered marriage was pressing against her chest. She passed familiar shops and streets she had once walked proudly as Richard's wife, but now every corner seemed to mock her. In the distance, a group of young women whispered and giggled, their eyes following her. She knew the rumors would spread by sunset. Richard's barren wife has finally been sent packing. Her stomach churned with shame, but her mind wandered back to the sacrifices she had made. She remembered when Richard's first shop was nothing but an empty room with cracked walls. It was her savings that had paid for the renovation, her contacts that brought in the first customers, and her sleepless nights that kept the accounts balanced. Yet today, he stood tall on the foundation of her labor and denied her completely. Tears streamed down her face as she dragged her feet along the lonely road. By midday, the sun scorched her skin and her strength nearly gave out. She sat by the roadside under the shade of a tree, hugging her bag to her chest as if it could protect her from the world's cruelty. A few passers-by stopped to look at her with curiosity, but none offered help. Her mind screamed with questions. Where will I sleep tonight? Who will listen to me? How will I begin again after losing everything? The silence that followed those questions was louder than any insult she had heard that morning. Then a memory sparked. Naomi, her childhood friend, her confidant, the one person who had always warned her that Richard's pride would one day destroy her. But Naomi no longer lived nearby. She had married and moved to another town 2 hours away. Clara wiped her tears with the back of her hand and whispered, "If anyone will take me in, it will be Naomi." She tightened her grip on the faded bag and began the long, weary journey, each step carrying her farther from the humiliation of the Ocoee mansion. By evening, after hours of trudging along dusty roads and catching short rides with sympathetic strangers, Clara reached Naomi's small but welcoming home in the new town. The wooden gate creaked as she pushed it open, her heart pounding with both fear and relief. She knocked weakly, her voice barely audible, as she called out, "Naomi, it's me?" Moments later, the door swung wide open, and Naomi stood there, her eyes widening in shock at the sight of her friend, dusty, weary, and broken. Without hesitation, Naomi pulled her inside and wrapped her in a tight embrace as Clara's tears poured freely once more. Naomi held Clara tightly, rocking her like a child. "Hush now," she whispered, brushing the dust from Clara's hair. "You are safe here. No one will harm you under my roof." Clara's sobs came in heavy waves, her voice breaking as she poured out everything. Richard's insults, his mother's cruelty, the years of sacrifice now dismissed like scraps. Naomi listened silently, her eyes filling with anger and pity. By the time Clara finished, her jaw was set. "He has treated you worse than a servant, and yet you carried his burdens. Clara, this is not your end. It is your beginning." Clara sat on Naomi's narrow bed, her face pale from exhaustion. "Beginning?" she whispered bitterly. "I have nothing left. No child, no husband, no home. Even the little wealth I had is in his hands. What kind of beginning is that?" Naomi took her hand gently, her voice steady. "The kind where you rise from the ashes. Did you not tell me once that strength is born in suffering? You gave Richard everything, and he turned it into gold for himself. Now it is time to build for you."
The words touched Clara, but her heart sagged under the weight of shame. "Naomi, I was thrown out like a beggar. They call me barren. How can I face a world that mocks me every time my name is spoken?" Naomi's eyes blazed as she clasped her friend's hands. "Clara, thank God you are here in another town. Their eyes cannot follow you here. Let them laugh in the city you left behind. One day, those same mouths will choke on their laughter when they see what you have become. Remember this, your worth is not measured by a man's insult, but by the destiny you rise to claim after life has tried to bury you." Naomi gave her food and water, insisting she rest, but Clara's mind refused to sleep. She replayed every sacrifice she had made, the money she had handed over without question, the long nights she had worked double shifts to keep their house running, the jewels she had sold for his business. Richard had grown wealthy because she believed in him, and now he acted as if she had been dead weight all along. Rage mixed with grief in her heart, and for the first time she felt a spark of defiance push against her despair. As the night deepened, Naomi sat beside her with a calm smile. "Clara, I will not tell you it will be easy. You will cry many more tears before the sun shines again. But I promise you this. One day, you will look back at this night and thank God it happened, because the woman you will become after this storm will be stronger than the one who knelt before Richard, begging for mercy. Sleep, my sister. Tomorrow we begin again." Clara clutched Naomi's hand, her tears slowing, and for the first time since the gate had shut behind her, she felt the faintest glimmer of hope. The next morning, Clara awoke to the sound of roosters crowing and the faint hum of traders setting up in the market nearby. Naomi had already gone to her provisions shop, leaving a note on the table. "Start small, but start. I believe in you." Clara held the paper to her chest, her eyes moist. Those words pierced through her despair, nudging her to rise. She washed her face, tied her scarf, and stepped outside. The world still heavy, but a little less crushing, with Naomi's faith lingering in her heart. That week, Clara helped Naomi at her provisions shop, arranging goods on the shelves and recording sales. It was humbling work, far from the elegance of the Okoye mansion, but it gave her a reason to breathe again. Customers came and went, some greeting her warmly, others barely noticing her, and for the first time in months, she moved without the weight of constant judgment. Though the ache of rejection still lingered in her chest, the quiet rhythm of honest work steadied her spirit. For now, survival was her only goal. One evening, Clara found Naomi sitting outside, staring into space. "You cannot sell for me forever," she said gently. "You are intelligent, Clara. You once managed Richard's accounts, balanced his books, and grew his shop into a thriving business. Use that skill for yourself." Clara shook her head. Naomi, I have nothing left. Even if I start, where will I get capital? Who will support me? Naomi smiled knowingly. We will find a way. Sometimes destiny hides behind the doors you think are locked. Days turned into weeks, and Clara slowly began taking small jobs around the neighborhood, helping women keep records for their shops, tutoring children in the evenings, even running errands for busy traders. The money was little, but it was hers. Each coin she saved reminded her of the strength she had forgotten she had. Her hands still shook when she thought of Richard, but the bitterness was slowly giving way to a quiet determination. One afternoon, Clara was scrolling through her phone when a headline stopped her cold. Business tycoon Richard Okoye expands Okoye & Sons Enterprises across the state. She clicked on the article, her hands trembling as she read about his booming empire, complete with glossy photos of towering plazas and staff in neat uniforms bowing as he stepped out of a luxury SUV. Her chest tightened. That should have been our dream. Bitterness clawed at her throat, but then she clenched her fists. The empire displayed on her screen had been built on her sacrifices, her savings, her years of labor. One day, the world will know my truth. That evening, Clara sat with Naomi, the article still open on her phone. She pushed it across the table, her voice low but steady. I may have lost a husband, but I still have my mind. Numbers have never failed me. Naomi studied the glowing screen with a frown, then looked back at her friend. Clara continued, her eyes burning with resolve. Traders in the market already trust me to balance their accounts. If they can trust me with their accounts, they can trust me with their savings. What Richard once mocked as useless may become the very gift that lifts me. She started small. Market women began giving her their daily profits to keep safe, and Clara carefully recorded every coin in a worn notebook, returning it exactly as promised when they asked. Soon, word spread that she was reliable, more reliable than some men who squandered money on drink. Within months, she was managing the savings of over 20 traders, and from there, she began giving out small loans to others who needed help. What had begun as a neighborly favor was quietly growing into a community fund, and every time she carried her ledger to the microfinance bank to deposit the bulk savings, the staff greeted her with respect. Clara, the woman once mocked as barren and useless, was building the foundation of something powerful. Clara's reputation spread beyond the noisy market stalls. By the end of the year, word reached wealthier traders and civil servants that a woman named Clara could be trusted with money as though it were gold. One afternoon, as she sat beneath Naomi's veranda updating her ledger, a tall man in a neat gray suit approached. He introduced himself simply as David, a local contractor who had heard of her from a friend. They say you are reliable with savings, he said, his eyes calm but curious. Is that true? Clara hesitated, unsure whether to trust this new level of attention. She had grown comfortable with market women and small traders, but this man carried the air of someone used to handling large sums. Still, she nodded. I do not play with people's money, sir. If I take 1 naira, I record it. If I promise a return date, I keep it. David studied her for a long moment before placing a brown envelope on the table. This is my first test, he said quietly. I want to see if you will treat me with the same honesty the others speak about. From that day, Clara's circle of savers expanded in ways she had never imagined. David's trust in her attracted others of his standing, and soon she was managing not just coins and small notes, but bundles of cash from people who once looked at her with doubt, but now admired her discipline. Each deposit strengthened her confidence. Each transaction reminded her that she was no longer defined by rejection, but by resilience. And though David came at first as an investor, he often stayed longer than necessary, asking about her journey, listening to her struggles, and admiring her quiet strength. Slowly, admiration began to soften into something warmer. Weeks turned into months, and David's visits became more frequent. At first, he came only to check on his savings, but soon he began lingering, asking about Clara's dreams and listening as she spoke of her struggles. Unlike Richard, who had once mocked her for every weakness, David listened with patience.
He never interrupted, never dismissed her pain. His eyes held no pity, only respect, and in his steady gaze, Clara found the strange comfort of being seen as a whole person again. One evening, David arrived as the sun was setting, carrying a basket of fresh fruit. "You work too hard, Clara," he said softly. "At least eat something that will give you strength." Clara laughed awkwardly, unused to such kindness. It had been years since anyone had thought of her needs. "I am fine," she murmured, but David shook his head gently. "A tree cannot give shade if it is dying inside. Do not starve yourself while you feed everyone else." His words sank deep into her, touching wounds she didn't know were still bleeding. Naomi noticed the change before Clara admitted it to herself. "That man is different," she teased one night as they sat together. Clara blushed, shaking her head. "He is an investor, Naomi, nothing more." But her friend only smiled knowingly. "Investors do not bring baskets of fruit and sit for hours listening to your stories. He sees more in you, and one day you will see it too." Clara tried to dismiss it, but her heart betrayed her, racing every time David's footsteps echoed near. The bond between them deepened quietly. David began helping her with ideas to expand her savings group into something larger. He encouraged her to register formally with a microfinance bank, offering advice on partnerships and investments. For the first time, Clara began to see herself not as the barren, discarded woman Richard had painted her to be, but as a leader with vision. And with each step she took forward, David was by her side, steady as a pillar. After 2 years of friendship laced with unspoken affection, David finally broke the silence. One quiet evening, as they closed her ledger together, he looked at her with steady eyes and said, "Clara, you have carried the weight of the world alone for too long. Let me carry it with you. Will you be my wife?" Clara froze, her heart pounding. Memories of Richard's cruelty flooded back, but then she looked at David, the man who had never mocked her, never belittled her, only lifted her. With tears in her eyes, she whispered, "Yes." Their wedding was small, but filled with peace. Unlike the grandeur of her first marriage, Clara and David exchanged vows in a modest hall, surrounded by a few friends and Naomi's tearful smile. There were no flashing cameras, no pretentious speeches, only sincerity. As David slipped the ring onto her finger, Clara felt a quiet strength flow through her. For the first time, she belonged to a man who valued her heart more than her womb, her mind more than her dowry. The early months of their marriage were gentle, filled with laughter that replaced the silence of her past. David encouraged her to expand her growing financial group, even linking her to contacts who brought in more clients. Clara blossomed under his support, her confidence returning like a tree in bloom after winter. She thought she had found her full reward already, until one morning sickness reminded her of a possibility she had buried deep inside: motherhood. When the doctor confirmed she was pregnant, Clara nearly collapsed in disbelief. She clutched David's hand as tears of joy streamed down her face. After years of being called barren, her womb stirred with life. David kissed her forehead softly. "You see, it was never you. It was never your fault." 9 months later, in a hospital room filled with prayers and anticipation, Clara delivered not one baby, but 2. Twin boys, healthy and strong. The nurses called them double portion blessings. The news spread quickly in the town where she now lived. Traders and families who had come to trust Clara gathered with wide smiles, celebrating the woman whose honesty had lifted so many. The woman once cast aside as barren now cradled 2 sons at once. Clara named them Emmanuel and Daniel, symbols of God's presence and judgment against those who had mocked her in the past. As she nursed them, her heart swelled with a joy so fierce it erased years of humiliation. She was no longer the empty vessel Richard had despised. She was a mother. But destiny was not finished with her. 2 years later, Clara's womb stirred again. Fear gave way to awe when another scan revealed yet another set of twins. This time, girls. The family rejoiced,
and Clara could barely contain her tears as she held her daughters in her arms, Grace and Gloria. 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, had come to the woman once branded barren. To everyone, it was a testimony. To Clara, it was God's way of rewriting her story with double abundance. By now, Clara's life had transformed beyond recognition. With David's steady hand beside hers, her savings network had become a recognized cooperative, trusted by traders and professionals alike. Her home rang with the laughter of 4 children, their tiny feet pattering through corridors once filled only with silence. Yet, even in her joy, shadows of the past occasionally returned. She thought often of Richard, not with longing, but with the faint ache of wounds not fully healed. One evening, as Clara reviewed her records, her email notification chimed. She clicked absent-mindedly, but the moment her eyes landed on the subject line, her chest tightened. Invitation to my wedding, from Richard Okoye. With trembling hands, she opened it. Dear Clara, my ex-wife, I use this medium to invite you to my wedding. Beneath it was an elegant digital card bordered in gold, displaying the words, You are cordially invited to the wedding of Richard Okoye and Vanessa Obu. Date, Saturday, July 17th, 2025. Venue, the Grand Regal Hotel, Banana Island, Lagos, Nigeria. Clara stared at the screen, her breath uneven. It wasn't only an invitation, it was a deliberate reminder, a way of summoning her to witness the life he believed she could never give him. Naomi, who was visiting, leaned over Clara's shoulder as the email glowed on the screen. Her eyes widened at the first line and then blazed with anger. The nerve of him, she spat, to call you my ex-wife and dress it up as an invitation? This is no courtesy, it is a trap. He wants you to appear in shame, to remind the world of the day he threw you out. Do not even think of going, Clara. Clara sat quietly, her fingers brushing the edge of the phone. Anger stirred in her chest, but beneath it was something stronger. Determination. If he wishes to disgrace me, then let him see what God has done. That night, Clara shared the matter with David. His eyes darkened as he read the invitation, but when he saw her expression, he smiled faintly. Do you want to go? He asked. Clara nodded slowly. Yes. Not for revenge, not for attention, but for closure. I want them to see me, not as the broken woman they cast away, but as the woman I truly am now. David reached for her hand and squeezed it firmly. Then we will go together. You will not walk into that hall alone.
Preparations began quietly. Clara chose a deep emerald gown that flowed with quiet elegance, one that would not scream for attention but command it nonetheless. David ordered a sleek black Rolls-Royce for the day, insisting, You must arrive with dignity. Let the car speak before your words do. The children, now lively and charming, were dressed in matching outfits. Emmanuel and Daniel in crisp suits, Grace and Gloria in flowing dresses that shimmered under the light. Naomi watched them prepare, with tears in her eyes. Clara, she whispered, when you walk into that hall, the world will know your truth. The wedding day dawned bright, the city buzzing with excitement. Richard had spared no expense. A grand hotel ballroom glittered with chandeliers, expensive cars lined the driveway, and guests poured in dressed in their finest attire. At the far end of the hall, Richard stood proudly beside his bride, Vanessa, smiling as if he owned the world. In the family section, just in front of them, Mrs. Okoye sat with her head high, her face glowing with pride. To her, this was not only Richard's triumph, but also her own vindication for driving Clara out years ago. Just as the master of ceremonies called the guests to settle, a sleek black Rolls-Royce glided to a stop in front of the hotel. Its polished body reflected the curious stares of onlookers. The driver stepped out, opened the door, and out came David in a perfectly tailored suit. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Clara emerged gracefully, her emerald gown hugging her frame, her head held high. And then the whispers grew louder when 4 children stepped out after her,
2 smartly dressed boys and 2 radiant girls, their laughter echoing like bells. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Guests craned their necks, whispering in disbelief. "Is that not Richard's ex-wife? But they said she was barren." Another voice hissed, "Look at the children, 2 sets of twins." Phones lifted into the air, flashes going off as people captured the scene. Richard, standing at the far end of the hall, froze when his eyes fell on the sight. The smile drained from his face as though someone had pulled the ground from under him. Clara walked into the hall with David at her side, her steps measured and calm, her eyes steady. The children clutched her hands, their innocence amplifying the weight of her presence. Conversations stilled. Even the music seemed to fade into silence. The woman Richard had mocked, insulted, and discarded had returned, not broken, not barren, but radiant, blessed, and stronger than ever. The guests who had once pitied her now looked at her with awe. Richard's bride, Vanessa, glanced at him with confusion, tugging at his sleeve. "Who is she?" she whispered sharply, sensing the unease in his face. Richard swallowed hard, his eyes locked on Clara. That's my ex-wife." Vanessa's eyes widened as she looked again at the 4 children who surrounded Clara, their resemblance to her undeniable. The humiliation began to creep into her chest. Ex-wife? And she has 4 children? Whispers rippled louder across the hall, every guest now waiting to see what would unfold. Clara stood still as the crowd's whispers grew into a low roar, every eye in the hall fixed on her emerald gown and the 4 children at her side. David gave her a reassuring nod, and she stepped forward with calm authority. The guests parted to make way, their murmurs filling the glittering hall. At the front row reserved for family, Mrs. Okoye sat proudly, her head high, unaware that the woman she had once thrown into the street was about to dismantle her pride before the very crowd she longed to impress. Richard's throat tightened as Clara approached. He forced a smile, though sweat beaded his brow. "Clara, I did not expect you would come." But Clara's eyes flicked briefly toward Mrs. Okoye before returning to him. "Of course you did. That is why you sent the invitation, to remind me of the shame you and your mother stamped on my name. But here I am, not broken, not barren, but carrying proof that God's judgment is higher than men's insults." Gasps rippled through the audience, and Mrs. Okoye shifted uncomfortably in her front row seat. Clara gestured toward her children, her voice steady. "For 8 years I was called barren. I was mocked, ridiculed, and cast aside. Richard, your mother called me a curse, yet today, the same womb you despised has produced not 1, but 2 sets of twins, 4 children, 2 sons who carry their father's legacy with honor, and 2 daughters who are the joy of my home." All eyes turned toward Mrs. Okoye, whose proud face had fallen into shock, her lips trembling as whispers of, "Wasn't she the one who said Clara was barren?" spread through the hall. Vanessa's eyes darted nervously as Clara continued. "And Richard, let us not forget how your so-called empire was built. When you had nothing, when you were a man with empty pockets and dreams too small to carry, it was my savings, my jewelry, my sweat that kept you standing. I helped build this foundation, yet you and your mother erased me as if I were nothing. Today, let the truth be known. You stand on a throne made of my sacrifices." The guests gasped louder, their eyes bouncing between Richard and his mother. The silence that followed was louder than any insult Clara had ever heard. Richard's hands shook and his lips parted, but no words came. Vanessa slipped her arm away, her face a mask of betrayal. And in the front row, Mrs. Okoye bowed her head, unable to meet the eyes of the guests. The same tongue that had once called Clara barren could not speak now. Clara raised her chin, her children beside her, and said quietly, "You threw me out to bury me in shame, but shame has found its way back home." Richard staggered back a step, his face pale as the whispers swelled into an open chorus. "So it was him all along?" someone muttered.
He called her barren, but look at her now, 4 children, another voice added. And she built his wealth too? What a disgrace! The hall buzzed with judgment, every guest suddenly a witness to his downfall. Richard raised his hands helplessly, but no words came. His tongue, once so sharp against Clara, had turned heavy as lead. Vanessa pulled her veil back, her cheeks flushed with fury. You lied to me, Richard. You said she could not have children, that she was the problem, yet here she stands with proof that you deceived us all. She snatched her hand from his and stepped aside, her body stiff with disgust. Cameras flashed, capturing every second, and Richard could feel the empire of pride he had built collapsing brick by brick. Clara turned slowly, her eyes sweeping across the hall. They rested briefly on Mrs. Okoye, whose head hung low, her pride in tatters. The same woman who had once mocked her was now cowering in shame before the world. Clara did not gloat, did not sneer. Instead, she spoke with quiet strength. I was called barren, I was cast out as worthless. But today, God has given me double through my trouble. To every woman here, your value is not in the words of men, but in the destiny God has written for you. The guests erupted in applause, some standing, others shouting affirmations. A few women dabbed tears from their eyes, moved by Clara's dignity. Richard tried to shout over the noise, but his voice cracked pitifully. She is lying. She only wants to humiliate me. But no one believed him. All eyes turned away, some filled with pity, most with scorn. Clara had spoken her truth, and the truth had drowned his excuses. David stepped forward then, taking Clara's hand firmly. Together, they turned to leave the hall, their children walking proudly beside them. The crowd parted again, but this time with respect, not curiosity. Cameras followed their every step, capturing the image of a woman who had risen from disgrace to glory. As the Rolls-Royce door shut behind her, Clara looked back one final time, not at Richard, not at his mother, but the life she had left behind, and then she whispered to herself, "This chapter is closed." The story of Clara became a lesson whispered across the city. Many who had once mocked her now used her name as a symbol of resilience. People said, "Do not despise a woman because of her delay, for only God knows the fullness of her tomorrow." Richard lost the respect he had fought so hard to gain, while his mother lived with the bitter taste of her own words. But Clara walked on with her head high, surrounded by the family and success she was told she would never have. Her life testified to a truth that cannot be erased. Those who are cast away in shame may rise again in glory, for no man has the final say over another's destiny.
If this story has touched your heart today, I want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. What lesson did you take away from this story? Do not forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find healing and strength in stories like this. And remember this, no matter how dark the betrayal, no matter how heavy the wound, you can rise again